Chapter 1. The Shape of What Remains. Abby Rice did not think of herself as sentimental. Not anymore. At 43, she had carefully curated a life that required no unnecessary softness, no lingering regrets, no habits of looking backward, no dangerous indulgence in what might have been. Her apartment was immaculate, her calendar full, her career thriving. Even her plants were chosen for resilience. Nothing that required delicate attention. Nothing that would wilt if she forgot it for a day or two. She liked things that endured. And yet, on a Wednesday evening she had not intended to waste, Abby found herself sitting cross-legged on the floor of her living room, staring at a photograph on her phone with a level of concentration usually reserved for high-stakes negotiations. The photo was not of her. It was of James. Her ex-husband looked older, of course, but not in a diminished way. He wore the years with an ease that irritated her. His hair had thinned slightly at the temples, and there were lines she didn't remember at the corners of his eyes. But he was smiling. Not a polite smile. Not the small, steady one he used to give when she pushed too hard for enthusiasm. This was something else entirely. He stood slightly off-center in the frame, one arm around a boy, maybe 8, Abby guessed, and the other resting on the shoulder of a younger girl who leaned into him in that unself-conscious way children leaned into the people they trusted. A woman stood beside them, his wife. Abby studied her longer than she cared to admit. She looked nothing like Abby had at that age. Softer, perhaps, less polished. There was a warmth to her expression that felt unguarded, like she hadn't spent years learning how to conceal disappointment. The four of them stood in front of what looked like a handmade wooden play structure. It wasn't the sort of thing you bought. It was sturdy in a way that suggested weight and patience and time. Of course, she thought. He built things. That had always been true. She just hadn't recognized it in time. Abby placed the phone face down on the hardwood floor beside her and leaned back on her hands, staring up at the ceiling. The overhead light was too bright, too direct. It cast no shadows, left nothing soft. Her chest felt tight. "Don't," she muttered to herself. "We're not doing this." Except she already had. It had started innocently, or at least she told herself it had. A stray conversation with a colleague about second chances. Passing curiosity. A name typed into a search bar without expectation. She had not expected to find him so easily, and she certainly had not expected him to look like that. Happy. The word lodged in her throat like a small, inconvenient truth. Abby exhaled sharply and pushed herself up off the floor. She crossed the room in a few brisk steps, as though physical movement might shake the thought loose. Didn't. Instead, it followed her into the kitchen, where she opened the refrigerator, stared inside without seeing anything, and closed it again. This was ridiculous. She had left him. Not impulsively, not carelessly. She had thought it through, examined every angle. At least she believed she had at the time. Their marriage had felt off somehow. She had been advancing, growing, climbing. He had remained steady. Too steady. She had told herself that meant he didn't care. That he wasn't trying. That if he truly wanted more from life, from them, he would show it in ways she recognized. What she hadn't considered, what she had refused to consider, was that he might not need to broadcast his efforts for them to exist. At the time, her logic had felt airtight. Now it creaked. Abby leaned against the counter, her arms folded tightly across her chest, as though she could physically hold herself in place. "He didn't even argue," she said aloud. The memory came uninvited. She could still see it with uncomfortable clarity. The way he had stood by the window, listening without interruption as she laid out her reasons with a calm she had practiced. The way he had nodded, as if she were explaining something obvious. "I think we want different things," she had said then. "And I don't think we're going to meet each other there." He had looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he had said. That was it. No raised voice, no accusations, no desperate attempt to change her mind. At the time, she had interpreted his composure as indifference. Now, Abby pressed her lips together. Now it felt like something else. Resignation, perhaps, or worse, understanding. She pushed away from the counter with a sudden, restless energy and reached for her phone again. Her thumb hovered over the screen for only a moment before she flipped it over and reopened the photo. She shouldn't look. She knew that. And yet, "You remarried," she murmured, her voice quieter now. "Of course you did." There were more photos. She scrolled despite herself. A birthday party. The same woman, her wife, laughing at something out of frame. The children again, older now in one, younger in another. A progression of time she had not witnessed. And James, throughout all of it, present in a way that felt complete. It unsettled her. Not because she begrudged him happiness. At least that's what she told herself. It was the clarity of it that bothered her. The undeniable evidence that he had built something solid after she had walked away. Something that looked not perfect but real, enduring. Her throat tightened. "Stop it," she said again, sharper this time. She locked the phone and set it down on the counter with more force than necessary. Then she stood there, staring at it as though it might do something unexpected. It didn't, of course. It simply lay there, silent and unbothered. Abby let out a slow breath and scrubbed a hand over her face. This wasn't productive. She had a meeting in the morning. A major one. She needed to review documents, finalize her notes, present with precision. That was the life she had built. One of measured control and clear outcomes. Not this. Not digging through the past because of a stray pang she couldn't quite name. Jealousy, a small voice suggested. She stiffened. No, she said immediately. The word sounded hollow even to her own ears. It wasn't jealousy. Couldn't be. She had chosen this. She had wanted more, and she had pursued it relentlessly. She had achieved things most people only talked about. And yet, Abby glanced back at the phone. And what exactly did you find? She asked herself quietly. The question hung in the air, unanswered. After a moment, she shook her head sharply, as though physically rejecting the line of thought. That's enough, she said. We are not unraveling over a social media search. With renewed determination, she turned away, heading toward her desk. She picked up a folder, flipped it open, scanned the first page. The words blurred. She exhaled in frustration and let the folder drop back onto the surface. This is absurd. A long silence settled. Then, almost despite herself, she reached for the phone again. Not to scroll this time. Not to revisit the photo. Just to look at his name. James Rice. It felt strangely formal, seeing it there, detached from her. Different. She hesitated. Then, before she could overthink it, she tapped into the search bar again and typed two simple words. Dallas, Texas. His location. He was still here. Of course you are, she whispered. The city suddenly felt smaller. Or perhaps she did. Abby stared at the screen for a long moment, something new unfolding beneath her carefully maintained composure. It wasn't love. She wasn't foolish enough to call it that. It wasn't even longing, not exactly. It was curiosity. Sharp and persistent. Uncomfortable in a way she couldn't easily dismiss. She didn't know what his life had turned into since she last saw him, except now she did. At least, she knew enough to realize how much she didn't understand. And that bothered her more than she expected. Abby set the phone down again, slower this time. Curiosity, she said softly, as though testing the word. It didn't sound dangerous, but something about it felt like the beginning of a problem she wasn't quite ready to admit she wanted. Chapter 2. Accidental geography, curiosity, Abby discovered, had a schedule. It woke up earlier than she did, louder than her alarm, and far more insistent. By Friday morning, it had rearranged her weekend. This is not stalking, she said to her reflection as she fastened her earrings with unnecessary precision. This is geographical awareness. Her reflection offered no commentary, which Abby chose to interpret as agreement. She stepped back, assessing the overall effect. Tailored jeans, soft ivory blouse, low heels, casual but intentional. The kind of outfit that suggested she just happened to look this put together. Completely normal, she added. What she did not say aloud was the reason she had driven 20 minutes out of her usual routine to stand in her bedroom debating blouse textures. The cafe. Not just any cafe. His cafe. Or more accurately, the cafe he frequented. She had pieced that together from an unfortunately thorough review of his social media posts, cross-referenced with location tags that had seemed harmless at the time. The place had a name. A charming one. Elm and Grain. Of course it did. Abby picked up her keys, hesitated, then grabbed her sunglasses as if they might somehow provide anonymity in a city of over 1 million people. You are not expecting to see him, she said firmly as she walked to the door. It would be statistically improbable. Unlikely. Almost absurd. Which, she decided, made this safe. 15 minutes later, Abby was certain the universe had a sense of humor, and it was not subtle about it. Elm and Grain was exactly as quaint as the name implied. Exposed brick, warm wood tones. A chalkboard menu with handwriting that looked effortlessly stylish. The air smelled faintly of fresh bread and something citrusy. It was the kind of place she would have dismissed years ago as trying too hard. Now, standing in line, she found herself liking it. You've changed, she muttered under her breath. The woman in front of her turned halfway around. Sorry. Abby froze. Nothing. I was just thinking about coffee. The woman blinked. Oh, right. Same. Abby gave a tight smile and focused very intently on the menu, which she had already read twice. When she reached the counter, the barista, a cheerful young man with an impressive mustache, beamed at her. What can I get started for you? Black coffee, she said quickly, defaulting to safety. He waited. She frowned. Is there more to that? Well, he said gently. We have 3 different beans today, each with its own profile. Surprise me, she cut in. His smile widened. Living dangerously. I like it. I doubt that, she murmured, but she handed over her card anyway. A moment later, she had a receipt, a number, and a growing sense that she had committed to something far more complicated than a cup of coffee. Abby moved toward the pickup area, scanning the room with what she hoped looked like casual awareness and not laser-focused reconnaissance. He wasn't there. Relief washed over her so quickly it almost made her dizzy. Good, she whispered. This was good. She could sit for a few minutes, confirm that this place existed exactly as it appeared online, and leave. That would satisfy the curiosity, close the loop, end the distraction. She chose a small table near the window and sat down, placing her phone deliberately out of reach, as though that would prevent anything impulsive. Number 24. Abby stood, retrieved her coffee, and returned to her seat. She took a cautious sip. It was excellent. That's annoying, she said softly, because now she would want to come back. And coming back would mean, don't, she interrupted her own thoughts. She had just settled into a fragile sense of control when the bell over the entrance door chimed. Abby didn't look up immediately. She told herself she wouldn't. Then she did. And there he was, James. He stepped inside with the same quiet presence she remembered, though something about him felt broader now, more certain in his movements. He wore a simple gray shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms, and jeans. Nothing remarkable. Except on him it was. Abby's breath caught, sharp and unexpected. He hadn't seen her. Not yet. He paused just inside, glancing around as if orienting himself, then walked toward the counter with an easy confidence that struck her as both familiar and entirely new. Okay, she whispered, gripping her cup a little too tightly. We're fine. This is fine. Her heart disagreed. It was beating faster than the situation warranted. Louder, more insistent. He was just a man she used to know, a man who now had a life that clearly did not include her. She could leave. That was an option, a very reasonable option. Instead, she stayed. Of course she did. James reached the counter, exchanged a few words with the barista, who clearly knew him, judging by the ease of their interaction, and waited. Abby watched him despite every sensible instinct telling her not to. There was something unsettling about the way he carried himself. Not because it was strange, but because it wasn't. He seemed settled, grounded. The same steadiness she had once mistaken for a lack of ambition now read differently. It wasn't absence, it was presence. And it fit him in a way she hadn't understood before. James! The voice came from across the room, bright and warm. Abby turned reflexively. A woman stood from a table near the back, waving him over. Abby recognized her instantly from the photos. His wife. Of course she was here. Of course. James's face lit up. Not dramatically, not in a way that demanded attention, but in that quiet, unmistakable way of someone genuinely pleased. He walked toward her table. Abby swallowed hard and looked down at her coffee, suddenly fascinated by the surface. You got this, the woman said as he approached, her voice carrying just enough for Abby to hear. I knew you would. He set his cup down and leaned slightly toward her, their shoulders brushing in a brief, easy contact. It wasn't exactly a high-stakes mission, he replied. That's not what you said this morning, she teased. You were very intense about it. I was focused, he corrected, though there was a hint of amusement in his tone. Their children weren't with them this time. It was just the two of them. Abby told herself she should stop listening. She didn't. Well, the woman pressed. Did it turn out the way you hoped? James took a sip of his coffee, considering. Better, actually. See, she said triumphantly. I told you to trust the process. You tell me that about everything. Because it's always true. He smiled, shaking his head slightly. That's a bold claim. Name one time I've been wrong. I married you, he said. There was a beat. The woman gasped, clutching her chest dramatically. Excuse me? He held her gaze, completely straight-faced for exactly 2 seconds before the corner of his mouth lifted. She swatted his arm. You are unbelievable. You set that up. You walked right into it. They both laughed. The sound hit Abby somewhere she hadn't expected. It wasn't painful. Not exactly. But it was something. Full. Real. Unforced. She stared down at her untouched coffee, her fingers tightening slightly around the cup. This was a mistake, she said quietly. Not coming here. That part, she couldn't quite regret. No, the mistake had happened years ago. Abruptly, Abby stood. She didn't give herself time to think, to reconsider, to linger. She grabbed her bag, left the coffee half finished, and headed for the door. Freedom was only a few steps away. Simple. Clean. Except, Abby. She stopped. Of course she did. Slowly, she turned. James stood a few feet away, his expression a mixture of surprise and something harder to name. I thought that was you, he said. His voice was exactly the same. Steady. Calm. Familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. Hi, Abby managed. Felt insufficient. He glanced briefly toward the table where his wife sat, watching with open curiosity, then back to Abby. Hi, he returned. There was a moment of silence. Too long. Too charged. Well, Abby said finally, grasping for normalcy. This is unexpected. A faint smile touched his lips. Dallas isn't that big. She let out a short laugh, more breath than sound. Apparently not. Another pause. Neither of them seemed quite sure what came next. You look well, he said. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was an observation, and somehow that made it land harder. So do you, she replied, because it was true. He nodded once, as though acknowledging the shared reality of that statement. Behind him, his wife was still watching. Not suspicious, just interested. Abby became acutely aware of the situation. "This must be your—" She gestured vaguely in the direction of the table, then stopped. "I mean, I saw online. Not intentionally. I just—" She closed her eyes briefly. "I should start that over." James's expression softened, just slightly. "It's okay," he said. "You don't have to explain." That oddly made it worse. "Right?" she said. Another silence. Abby shifted her weight, suddenly very conscious of every second. "Well," she said at last, "I should go. It was good to see you." Felt like a line from someone else's life. He seemed to recognize that too. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You too." She turned before she could hesitate again and walked out of the cafe, the bell chiming softly behind her. Once outside, she didn't stop. She kept moving, her steps brisk, her thoughts anything but. "Well done," she muttered to herself. "That was incredibly smooth." Her pulse was still racing, her chest still tight, and beneath it all, something else had taken root. Something far more complicated than curiosity. Across the room, James watched the door for a moment longer than necessary. "Friend of yours?" his wife asked gently when he returned to the table. He sat down, picking up his coffee. "Yeah," he said after a beat. His gaze lingered on the window. Something like that. Chapter 3, Narrative Control Attempted, Not Achieved. By Sunday afternoon, Abby Rice had decided firmly, definitively, and with a level of authority she usually reserved for contract negotiations, that Friday night had not happened in any meaningful way. This conclusion had taken work. It had required several long walks, an unnecessary amount of online shopping, and one deeply unproductive attempt to reorganize her kitchen drawers. But she had arrived at it all the same. "It was incidental," she said aloud as she refolded a set of dish towels for the third time. "A statistical anomaly." The towels did not argue. Encouraged, Abby continued, "I went to a cafe. He happened to be there. We exchanged basic pleasantries. End of story. Simple, neat, contained. Exactly the kind of narrative she preferred. Unfortunately, her memory refused to cooperate with the revision. It insisted on replaying the moment he said her name. Not loudly, not dramatically, just certainly. "Abby." She pressed her lips together and shoved the towels into the drawer with unnecessary force. "Enough," she said, because the real problem wasn't the encounter itself. It was what had followed. Specifically, the way she had walked out of that cafe feeling like she had just left something unfinished. Not unresolved necessarily, there had been nothing to resolve, but incomplete, which made no sense. "Closure is overrated," she muttered, pulling open another drawer. That drawer, unfortunately, contained the wrong utensils. She stared at it for a moment, frowned, and closed it again. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Abby ignored it. She had already ignored 2 calls and a message that she suspected was from her friend Dana, who had an inconvenient habit of asking questions Abby didn't feel like answering. The phone buzzed again, and again. With a sigh, Abby crossed the kitchen and picked it up. "Dana, you're alive, right? Because if you died without telling me, I'm going to be extremely offended." "Dana." Again, also I ran into Mark, and he told me you've been mysterious all weekend, which is code for acting weird. Explain. Abby considered ignoring that too. Then she typed, "Abby, I went to a cafe." The typing bubble appeared instantly. "Dana, what did you do to yourself?" Abby exhaled slowly. "Abby, nothing dramatic. I just ran into someone." She hesitated. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, "Abby, James." There was a pause. Long enough that Abby briefly wondered if Dana had dropped her phone in shock. Then, "Dana, excuse me. Dana, you're James?" "Abby, no, Dana. Not my James." The reply came quickly. "Dana, you know what I mean. The James." Abby leaned against the counter, staring at the screen. "Abby, yes." The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, and reappeared. "Dana, okay, I need a full report immediately. Start from the beginning. Were you being normal? You were not being normal, were you?" Abby hesitated. Honesty, she decided, within limits. "Abby, I was fine." "Dana, that is not an answer." "Abby, we said hello. That's it." Pause. Then, "Dana? And his wife?" Abby froze for a fraction of a second. Of course that was the next question. "Abby, she was there." "Dana, oh, this just keeps getting better." "Better for you?" Abby muttered. "Abby, we didn't really talk. I left." Another pause. Then, "Dana, that's it?" Abby stared at the words. That's it. That was the story she was telling. That was the version she had decided on. "Yes," she said quietly. Her thumbs hovered over the screen. Then, almost against her better judgment, she added, "Abby, he looks different." Dana did not make her wait. "Dana, different how?" Abby exhaled slowly. Finding the right word felt more difficult than it should have been. "Abby, settled." The response came more slowly this time. "Dana, that doesn't sound like a bad thing." "No," Abby said aloud. "It doesn't." but it had unsettled her all the same. Because she remembered him being steady, calm, consistent. She had labeled it as a lack. Now, seeing it again, seeing what it had become, it felt like she had misread an entire language. Her phone buzzed again. Dana, are you okay? Abby stared at the message. It was a simple question, one she should be able to answer. Instead, she typed, Abby. Of course I am. She hit send before she could reconsider. Dana didn't respond immediately, and for once Abby was grateful. Later that evening, Abby found herself back in her living room, the same place she had been when this had started. The lighting was softer this time. She had learned something, if nothing else. Her laptop sat open on the coffee table, untouched. A document she had intended to review remained stubbornly blank, her cursor blinking at her like a quiet accusation. You're being ridiculous, she told it. The cursor blinked. Unimpressed, Abby leaned back into the couch, exhaling. The encounter at the cafe had been brief, objectively insignificant, so why did it feel like more? Her mind drifted, unhelpfully, to the last time she had seen him before Friday, the actual last time, the day he left. She had expected something different from that conversation. Not a fight necessarily, but something, emotion, resistance, proof that what they had shared mattered enough to challenge her decision. Instead, he had listened, understood, accepted. At the time, she had walked away feeling justified, certain. Now the memory had shifted, not changed exactly, but rebalanced. What if he wasn't indifferent? She murmured. The question lingered. What if he had simply known her well enough to recognize that, once she decided something, arguing would only harden her resolve? What if his silence had not been a lack of care, but a different kind of care entirely? Abby sat up, frowning. That's a very convenient reinterpretation, she said sharply. It was dangerous, this way of thinking. It rewrote the past in ways she couldn't verify. And yet, it explained something she hadn't been able to reconcile before. Why he hadn't looked surprised. As if he had seen the distance forming long before she acknowledged it. Abby rubbed her forehead. No, she said firmly. We're not doing hypothetical retrospection. That road led nowhere productive. Still, her gaze drifted, almost involuntarily, to her phone. She hesitated, then reached for it. Not to search this time, not to scroll, just to look. His profile loaded quickly, too quickly, as though it had been waiting. The same photos stared back at her, the same life she hadn't been part of. But now there was something new layered over it. Context. She noticed details she hadn't before. The way his wife stood close but not clingy, comfortable. The way the children looked at him, not with forced affection, but easy trust. The way he existed in those images not as the center but as a constant. Abby swallowed. You built something, she said softly. Not flashy, not performative, just real. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then, before she could question it, she tapped into an older photo. It was different from the rest. No family, just him. Standing in what looked like a workshop. The wooden chest was there, the one he had taken when he left, but it wasn't finished. It looked like he had been working on something else beside it. There was sawdust on his shirt. His expression was focused, intent, ambitious, in a way she hadn't known how to recognize at the time. Abby stared at the image for a long moment. That was always there, wasn't it? She asked quietly. Not new. Not something he had discovered after her. Something she had simply missed, or dismissed. She set the phone down slowly. A strange, almost reluctant awareness settled over her. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was perspective. And it was shifting. Abby leaned back into the couch, staring at the ceiling. Well, she said after a moment, a faint, humorless smile touching her lips. This is inconvenient, because the version of her life she had believed in, the one built on certainty, on clarity, on being right, was starting to feel less solid. And she didn't know what to do with that. Across town, in a house filled with the quiet noise of evening routines, James Rice stood at his kitchen sink, drying a plate. How long are you going to pretend that didn't shake you? His wife asked from the table. He paused, just for a second, then continued drying. I'm not pretending anything, he said calmly. She smiled slightly, watching him. She said. Of course not. He set the plate down, stacking it neatly. Her name's Abby, he added after a beat. I figured. Another small smile. He turned toward her, leaning back against the counter. It was unexpected, he said. That's usually how those things go. He huffed a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. Yeah. She studied him for a moment, then softened. Are you okay? The question hung between them. Simple. Familiar. He considered it, then nodded. Yeah, he said. I think so. She held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded back. Good. He reached for the next plate. But later, long after the dishes were done, the question lingered in a way he hadn't anticipated. Not disruptive, not overwhelming, just present, like a story he thought had ended, quietly reminding him it still existed. Chapter 4. The problem with patterns. Abby lasted 3 days. She considered that a victory. On Monday, she worked late. On Tuesday, she scheduled a lunch meeting across town. On Wednesday morning, she stood in her kitchen holding her keys, staring at the door like it had personally betrayed her. "This is not a return," she said firmly. "It's proximity." Her calendar, which she had checked twice, technically supported this claim. She had a client 10 minutes from Elm and Grain. 10 minutes was not nothing. 10 minutes justified coffee. Strategic efficiency, she added, grabbing her bag. "That's all this is." Her tone carried the confidence of someone who had convinced herself of something with great effort and moderate success. Elm and Grain was busier than it had been on Friday. Abby noted that immediately, as though cataloging environmental variables might anchor her. Different crowd, different energy, different outcome. She stepped inside, the now familiar scent of citrus and bread wrapping around her like something she refused to call comforting. "This is fine," she murmured. It would be fine, because there was no reason for anything unusual to happen again. The universe would not repeat itself that predictably. Abby scanned the room. He wasn't there. Relief came quickly and, annoyingly, so did disappointment. She chose to focus on the first. "See?" she said under her breath. "Completely normal." At the counter, the same mustached barista lit up. "Back again. You survived the mystery coffee." "I did," Abby said, allowing a small smile. "I assume you'll make me another questionable decision if I don't intervene." He pressed a hand to his chest. "Madam, I only guide. I never impose." "Black coffee," she said. He nodded approvingly. "Growth." Abby stepped aside, ignoring the quiet satisfaction she felt at the exchange. This place was doing something to her, and she didn't entirely appreciate it. She took her coffee and chose a seat near the window again, not because it was where she'd sat before, but because it provided the most unobstructed view of the exit. For efficiency. Always efficiency. She had just taken her first sip when the chair across from her scraped lightly against the floor. Abby looked up. James stood there, one hand resting casually on the back of the chair, his expression somewhere between polite question and quiet certainty. "Do you mind?" he asked. For a moment, Abby forgot how to respond to simple requests. Then, No, of course." Smooth, she thought. He sat, just like that. No dramatic lead-in. No elaborate setup. Just presence. "You're becoming a regular," he said, glancing at her cup. Abby held his gaze for exactly 1 second too long before answering. "I could say the same to you." A faint smile touched his mouth. "That would be accurate." There was a pause. Not uncomfortable. Not entirely. Just aware. Abby cleared her throat. "I had a meeting nearby." He nodded once. "Makes sense." She waited. There it was again, that absence of pressure. No digging, no probing. Just acknowledgement. It unnerved her in ways she wasn't prepared to articulate. "And you?" she asked, because silence felt more dangerous than conversation. "Same place, same time," he said lightly. "I stick to patterns." Abby blinked. "Do you?" she asked before she could stop herself. His eyes flickered with something, amusement maybe. "More than I used to," he said. The answer landed with an unexpected weight. Abby shifted slightly in her chair, suddenly aware of how easily this could tip into something deeper than surface-level conversation. "So," she said brightly, too brightly, "Dallas is still working out for you." "Yeah," he said, watching her carefully now. "It is." "Good," she thought. "Good for you." The words didn't quite settle the way they were supposed to. Before she could find something safer to say, a voice cut gently through the moment. "I had a feeling I'd find you here." Abby didn't turn immediately. She didn't need to. Her shoulders tightened just enough to betray her. James's gaze shifted past her, softening in a way Abby had already learned to recognize. "Timing's impressive," he said. "I like to make an entrance." Abby turned. His wife stood there, a soft smile on her face, her eyes taking in the scene with quiet curiosity. "Hi," she said, her tone easy, open. "We didn't properly meet the other day." There it was. The moment Abby had hoped to avoid and, apparently, had walked straight back into. Abby stood quickly, nearly knocking her chair in the process before catching it. "Right?" she said. "Yes, that was less than ideal." The woman's smile widened slightly. "I wouldn't go that far." "I would," Abby said, then immediately winced. "I mean not." "Abby," James said gently. She stopped talking. His wife extended her hand. "I'm Claire." Warm, steady, no edge to it. Abby shook it, grateful that her own felt reasonably normal. "Nice to meet you," Abby said, and surprisingly she meant it. Claire glanced between them, her expression thoughtful but not intrusive. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. Abby thought briefly of inventing an urgent obligation. Instead, she heard herself say, "Of course not." Claire sat, folding seamlessly into the conversation like she'd always been there. "So," Claire said lightly, "old friends." Abby hesitated. James didn't. "We were married," he said, direct, unadorned. Claire blinked once. Then she nodded. "That adds a layer," she said matter-of-factly. Abby let out a short, startled laugh. Yes, she said. That's one way to describe it. Claire leaned back slightly, studying Abby with open interest. You seem different from what I imagined, she said. Abby raised an eyebrow. And what did you imagine? Claire considered. Less direct. James huffed a quiet breath beside them. That tracks, he said. Abby shot him a look. You're enjoying this. I'm surviving it, he corrected. Claire smiled. You're both doing very well, considering. Considering what? Abby asked. Claire gestured between them. The obvious. Abby opened her mouth, then closed it again. Because the obvious, unfortunately, required no explanation. So, Claire continued, entirely unfazed, are you still in the same line of work? The question grounded Abby just enough to recover. Yes, I stayed with it, she said. It turned out the way I expected. Claire nodded. That's good. There was no edge in it. No comparison. Just simple acknowledgement. And you? Abby asked, turning slightly toward Claire. What do you do? I run a small arts program, Claire said. Community-based. Classes, workshops, that kind of thing. That sounds… Abby paused, searching for a word that didn't sound dismissive. Rewarding. Claire grinned. It is. Also chaotic. Sometimes both at once. James added, mostly chaotic. You love it, Claire shot back. I do, he said without hesitation. The ease between them settled over the table like something tangible. Abby felt it again, that quiet shift in understanding. Not performance. Not presentation. Just comfort. James builds most of the setups we use, Claire added, almost casually. Furniture, installations, all of it. Abby's gaze snapped back to him. You're still doing that? She asked. He shrugged slightly. I never stopped. Of course you didn't, she thought. You just didn't, she began, then stopped. He tilted his head. Didn't what? Nothing, she said quickly. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. But he didn't press. He never did. Claire glanced between them again, clearly registering something unsaid. Well, she said lightly, I feel like I've walked into the middle of a conversation I didn't get the first half of. Abby let out a breath that turned into a weak laugh. That's accurate. Claire smiled. Then maybe we don't need to force the rest of it. The simplicity of that landed. Abby stood, this time more carefully. I actually do need to go, she said. Meeting. Partial truth, but close enough. James nodded. Right? Claire stood as well. It was nice meeting you, Abby. You too, Abby said. And again, she meant it. She hesitated just for a moment, then looked at James. It was good to see you, she said. More steady this time. More real. He nodded once. Yeah, he said. It was. Abby turned and walked out, the bell chiming behind her. Outside, the air felt cooler than she expected. She paused, just long enough to steady herself. That, she said under her breath, went poorly. A beat. Or well, she corrected. Which is worse, because now she couldn't pretend this was nothing. Not curiosity. Not coincidence. Not a closed chapter. No, now it was something far more inconvenient. Understanding. And once you started understanding something you'd spent years misreading, there was no clean way to go back. Chapter 5. The uncomfortable mirror. Abby discovered that understanding, once started, was not a tidy process. It did not arrive with clarity and conclusion. It arrived in fragments, in passing thoughts, in misplaced reactions, in quiet moments where the mind wandered somewhere it had previously refused to go. By Tuesday, it had become deeply inconvenient. You are overthinking, she said firmly, pacing her living room in the same measured steps she used when rehearsing important presentations. Except this wasn't a presentation. There was no outcome to control. No variables. No agenda, she added, stopping mid-step. This is not a situation that requires analysis. Her silence waited, then calmly betrayed her again. You went back. Abby exhaled sharply and resumed pacing. I went for coffee. Twice. That's not statistically significant. You spoke to them. Briefly. You listened. She stopped. That part she couldn't dismiss as easily. Because she had. Not intentionally. Not at first. But once the conversation had started, she found herself paying attention in a way she hadn't anticipated. To Claire's tone. To the way she spoke about her work, about her life, about James. Not in grand declarations. In small things. Easy things. Things Abby had once dismissed as insufficient. She walked to the window, crossing her arms tightly. That doesn't mean anything, she said. It meant something. And she knew it. Dana did not help. You met the wife? Yes. And she was what? Awful? Secretly judging you? Overly nice in a threatening way. She was normal, Abby said. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Well, that's disappointing, Dana replied. I was hoping for drama. Of course you were. Abby leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at nothing in particular. She was, Abby hesitated, searching for the right word. Kind. That's illegal in this context, Dana said immediately. She's supposed to at least be suspicious. She wasn't, Abby said. Not even slightly. Abby could practically hear Dana recalibrating. And him? Dana asked. Abby's grip tightened slightly around the edge of the counter. What about him? How was he with her? The question landed more directly than Abby expected. Easy, she said after a moment. Define easy. Abby exhaled. He's not performing, she said. There's no effort to it. It just exists. There was a brief silence. That's harder to compete with, Dana said quietly. I'm not competing, Abby snapped. I didn't say you were, Dana replied. I said it's harder. Abby pressed her lips together. Because that was the problem. There was nothing to push against. No obvious flaw. No narrative she could build to explain why it didn't matter. He didn't change, Abby said finally. Oh, he's the same, she continued, her voice more thoughtful now. Just more of it. Like whatever was there before actually had room to expand. Dana hummed softly. And you didn't see that before. It wasn't a question. Abby closed her eyes. No, she admitted. The word sat in the air longer than she expected. You thought he lacked something, Dana said. I thought he wasn't trying. And now, Abby opened her eyes slowly. And now I think, she said carefully, that he didn't feel the need to prove anything. Dana let out a low whistle. Well, she said, that's unfortunate. For who? Abby asked, sharper than she intended. Dana didn't hesitate. You already know. That evening, Abby made a decision. It was a controlled decision. A measured one. A decision rooted in logic, not emotion. I'm going back, she said aloud. But this time, it wasn't accidental. It wasn't proximity or convenience or pattern. It was intentional, which meant she told herself that she was in control. That makes this better, she added. Her reflection in the hallway mirror suggested otherwise. Elm and Grain felt different that evening. Quieter. Dimmer. The crowd had shifted. Laptops replaced with conversation. Coffee with wine and late conversations. Abby hesitated at the door. This is a bad idea, she said. Then she stepped inside anyway. He was already there. Of course he was. Not at the counter this time. Not alone. He sat at a table near the back. A notebook open in front of him. Pen in hand. Working. Or thinking. Or both. Abby stood still for a moment watching him. Last chance, she murmured. Then she moved forward. He noticed her immediately. Not in a sudden way, no double take, no surprise. Just a quiet recognition like he had expected the possibility. Hi, he said. Hi. She stopped at the edge of the table. Do you have a minute? She asked. The question sounded far more formal than she intended. He studied her briefly, then closed the notebook. Yeah, he said. I have a minute. She sat. Not across from him this time. Adjacent. Felt less like a confrontation that way. I owe you an apology, she said. Direct, efficient, safe ground. For what? He asked. There was no tension in his voice. No edge. Just genuine curiosity. Abby frowned slightly. For how things ended, she clarified. I've been thinking about it. He nodded once, absorbing that. You don't owe me that, he said. She blinked. That's not how apologies work. A faint smile touched his lips. I know, he said. I just meant. You don't have to carry it like that. I do if I was wrong. The words came out sharper than she expected. He leaned back slightly, considering her. Were you? He asked. The simplicity of the question caught her off guard. Yes, she said immediately, then hesitated. No, she amended. I mean, not entirely. She stopped, frustrated. He didn't interrupt, didn't fill the space, just waited. You weren't what I thought you were, she said finally. His brow lifted slightly. That sounds like more of a you problem. Despite herself, Abby laughed. Yes, she said. It is. A silence settled between them. But this one was different, less strained, more honest. I thought you lacked ambition, she continued. I remember, he said. I was wrong, she said. He tilted his head. I don't know if you were. Abby stared at him. Excuse me? I'm not ambitious the way you are, he said calmly. I never was. That's not what I'm seeing now. He shrugged slightly. That's because you're seeing the outcome, not the approach. The words clicked into place with uncomfortable precision. You're saying nothing changed, she said. I'm saying I didn't, he replied. Circumstances did. And I didn't give them time to, she said. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Abby exhaled slowly, leaning back. That's not a great realization. No, he agreed. Another pause. She glanced at him, studying his face more closely this time. You knew, didn't you? She asked quietly. Knew what? That I was going to leave. His gaze held hers for a long moment. Yeah, he said. The answer didn't surprise her. It still stung. Why didn't you say anything? He considered that. Because by the time you got there, he said. You needed to. She frowned. That doesn't make sense. It does, he said gently. You weren't questioning. You were deciding. Abby looked away, because that was exactly right. I thought I was being rational, she said. You were, he replied. Just incomplete. She let out a quiet breath. Incomplete, she repeated. Yeah. Another silence. Then Abby straightened slightly, her posture shifting back into something more familiar. I'm glad you're happy, she said. It was the right thing to say. The expected thing. He nodded. I am, he said. No hesitation. No apology. Just truth. It landed clean, and heavier than she expected. I should go, she said, standing. This time she didn't rush, didn't stumble, just decided. Abby, she paused, turned back. He watched her with that same steady look she was beginning to understand too late. You found what you were looking for? He asked. The question echoed his last words to her all those years ago. She blinked, caught off guard. I thought I did, she said. He didn't respond. He didn't need to, because the space between that answer and the truth was suddenly very clear. Abby nodded once, more to herself than to him. Then she left. This time her steps were slower, measured. Not because she was uncertain, but because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't entirely sure where she was going next. Behind her, James didn't reopen his notebook right away. Instead, he sat there, fingers resting lightly on the cover, his expression thoughtful, not unsettled, not undone, but changed, in a quiet, undeniable way, like something long settled had just been reconsidered. Chapter 6. The space between decisions. Abby did not go back to Elm and Grain the next day. This time it wasn't discipline. It wasn't even avoidance in the way she might have once understood it. It was processing, which she discovered was significantly less efficient than she would have preferred. By Thursday evening, she had worked 12 hours straight, cleared 2 major deliverables, and successfully convinced 3 different people she had everything entirely under control. None of it helped, because underneath the structure, the meetings, the contracts, the forward motion of a life she had built carefully, something quieter had shifted, and it refused to be neatly categorized. You found what you were looking for? The question had followed her home. Not loudly, not insistently, just consistently. Abby stood in front of her kitchen sink, running water she had no real purpose for, staring at the reflection of her blurred outline in the stainless steel. I thought I did, she had said. At the time, it had been the closest thing to the truth she could manage. Now it felt incomplete. She turned off the water and leaned her hands against the counter, her shoulders sinking slightly. What exactly were you looking for? She asked softly. A better life. More. Progress. A future that felt expansive, not contained. She had achieved those things. Objectively. Her career had unfolded precisely along the path she had envisioned, sometimes beyond it. She had independence, autonomy, control. No compromises she hadn't chosen. No constraints she hadn't accepted knowingly. So why did that question still echo? Abby exhaled slowly. Because success isn't the same thing as certainty, she said. And certainty, she realized, had been what she was actually chasing. The conviction that she was making the right choices, that she was moving towards something meaningful, that she wasn't settling. Her fingers tightened slightly against the counter. And you weren't, she added quickly, defensive even now. You weren't settling. But maybe she stopped that thought before it could fully form. Don't rewrite the past, she said firmly. That wasn't fair. To him, to herself. At the time, she had believed what she was doing was right. She had acted accordingly. That's not the same thing as being wrong, she insisted. But it wasn't the same thing as being right, either. Abby pushed herself upright, shaking off the weight of the thought. Enough. She needed something else to focus on. Something structured. Something predictable. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up automatically. Dana. Emergency. I need you. Abby arched an eyebrow. Abby. Define emergency. Dana. I volunteered you for something. Abby stared at the message. Then, Abby, no. Dana. You haven't heard what it is yet. Abby. That's not relevant. The typing bubble appeared immediately. Dana. It's for a community program. Kids. Art fundraiser. Silent auction setup. Event logistics. I may have implied you're very organized and competent. Abby blinked. No, she repeated aloud. Abby, I am not volunteering. Dana. Too late. You're already admired. Abby closed her eyes briefly. Of course I am, she muttered. Abby. When is this? Pause. Long enough to be suspicious. Dana. Saturday. Abby's eyes snapped open. Abby. Absolutely not. Dana. Please? Abby leaned her hip against the counter, already calculating. Saturday was empty. Deliberately empty. She had planned to keep it that way. Say no, she told herself. This is unnecessary disruption. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then, Abby, what exactly would I have to do? Saturday arrived faster than she expected. By mid-morning, Abby stood in a converted community space that smelled faintly of paint, sawdust, and new beginnings. This is chaos, she said, taking in the half-finished tables, stacks of supplies, and people moving with varying degrees of urgency and direction. I prefer the word dynamic, Dana replied, handing her a clipboard. Abby accepted it automatically. Of course she did. What's the plan? Abby asked. Dana smiled, entirely too pleased with herself. You're looking at it. Abby stared at her. This is not a plan. This is an emotional support clipboard. It's working already, Dana said. Abby inhaled slowly, then exhaled through her nose. Okay, she said. Okay, we can work with this. Within 10 minutes, Abby had imposed structure. Tables were reassigned, materials organized, volunteers redirected with calm authority and precise instruction. Labels, she muttered, writing quickly. Why are there no labels? Because we knew you'd fix that, Dana called from across the room. Convenient, Abby replied. She was in motion now, focused, efficient. This was familiar territory, controllable. Excuse me, a voice said behind her. Abby turned and froze. Of course. Claire stood there, a box balanced against her hip, her expression bright with recognition. Oh, Claire said. Well, that explains things. Abby blinked. I'm sorry, what explains things? Claire gestured lightly around them. The sudden appearance of structure. Abby let out a breath that was half laugh, half disbelief. You're involved in this? Very, Claire said. I run it. There was a brief, suspended moment where understanding clicked into place with almost comedic precision. Dana. Of course it was Dana. Abby closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, then opened them again. Well, she said. That's efficient. Claire smiled, clearly amused. I was going to say surprising, she replied. I'm full of those lately. Yes, Claire said thoughtfully. You are. There was no accusation in it. No pointed meaning. Just observation, which somehow made it more unsettling. You're doing great. By the way, Claire added, nodding toward the newly organized space. We usually spend half the day figuring out what goes where. Abby glanced around. Everything was coming together. Neater, clearer, less chaotic. I have a low tolerance for ambiguity, Abby said. I can see that. Another pause. Then Claire shifted the box slightly. James is in the back, she said casually. Abby's stomach tightened, just for a moment. Of course he is, she replied. Claire tilted her head slightly, studying her. You don't have to. I know, Abby interrupted gently. And she did. That was the problem. I'm just here to help, Abby added. Claire held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. Good, she said. Because we need it. She passed Abby the box. Can you handle these? Abby looked inside. Supplies, tools, pieces for assembly. Yes, she said. I can handle this. Claire smiled. I figured. She moved off to coordinate something across the room, leaving Abby standing there for a moment longer than necessary. This is fine, Abby said under her breath. Perfectly fine. She adjusted her grip on the box and turned toward the back room. The noise shifted as she stepped through the doorway. Quieter, more focused. And there he was. James stood at a work table, sleeves rolled up, hands steady as he aligned 2 pieces of wood with careful precision. He hadn't noticed her yet. Abby paused, just for a second, watching. He worked the same way she remembered. Unhurried, intent, no wasted motion. The difference was there was no pressure here, no expectation, just the work, and the quiet satisfaction of doing it well. Of course, she murmured. She stepped forward. His head lifted, and once again, recognition settled over his expression like it had been waiting patiently. Hi, he said. Hi. She lifted the box slightly. I come bearing unclear intentions and hardware. That earned a faint smile. Those usually go together, he said. She set the box down beside him. We should talk about your definition of usually. Later, he said. Right now we build things. Abby glanced at the table, then back at him. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Okay, she said. Show me how. Chapter 7. The things we build. Abby discovered quickly that building something alongside another person removed a great deal of hiding space. There was no room for abstraction when your hands were occupied. No graceful way to retreat into carefully chosen language while holding a screwdriver and trying not to strip a bolt. Not like that, James said mildly. Abby stopped mid-motion, the tool in her hand hovering uncertainly. I know how to use basic equipment, she replied, narrowing her eyes slightly. I didn't say you didn't, he said. I'm just suggesting a different angle. She glanced down at the piece of wood they were working on, then back at him. You're suggesting I'm doing it wrong. I'm suggesting there's an easier way. Abby exhaled, then shifted her grip. Fine. Show me. He stepped beside her, not taking over, not reaching for the tool immediately, just adjusting the angle of the board slightly with one hand. Now try, he said. She did. The screw slid in smoothly. Abby paused. Okay, she admitted. That is better. I aim for efficiency, he replied. She gave him a look. You do not get to say that like you invented efficiency. A corner of his mouth lifted. Fair. They worked in a quiet rhythm after that. Not silent, but not forced either. The kind of steady, shared focus that didn't need constant conversation to sustain it. Abby found herself liking it, which was deeply inconvenient. You're thinking too hard, he said after a while. She didn't look up. I'm concentrating. Same thing with you, he replied. She huffed a soft breath. That's not accurate. It is when your shoulders start doing that. My shoulders are not doing anything. They are, he said calmly. They're about 3 inches higher than they need to be. Abby froze, then very deliberately relaxed them. That's annoyingly observant, she said. I've had practice. The words lingered between them, quieter than everything else. Abby glanced at him, something flickering briefly in her expression before she looked back down at the table. Yes, she said softly. You have. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, as if on cue, the door behind them pushed open. Status update, Claire announced, stepping into the room with her usual easy energy. She paused, taking in the scene, the partially assembled structure, the tools laid out in careful order, Abby and James working side by side. Well, she said, clearly impressed. This looks significantly less chaotic than before. That's Abby, James said. Abby didn't look up. It's labeled, she said, as if that explained everything. Claire laughed. Of course it is. She stepped closer, examining their progress. This is exactly what we needed, she added. Functional and stable. I like to think we bring both, Abby said dryly. Claire grinned. I don't doubt it. There was an ease in the room that Abby was becoming more aware of. Not just between Claire and James, but around them. Like their world had space for other people in it. Like it didn't require adjustment to accommodate something new. It unsettled her. And more frustratingly, it impressed her. We'll need 2 more of these finished in the next hour, Claire said. Think you can manage? James nodded. Yeah. Claire's gaze shifted to Abby. Up for it? She asked. Abby hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, of course, Claire smiled. Good. I'm trusting you two to keep things from collapsing. As she turned to leave, she added lightly, no pressure. The door swung shut behind her. Abby exhaled. She's dangerous, she said. James glanced at her. How so? She's very calm about everything, Abby replied. That usually means she understands more than she's saying. He smiled faintly. Yeah, it does. Abby studied him for a moment. And you're comfortable with that? Yeah, he said again. No hesitation. She looked down at the structure in front of them. I used to think that meant you weren't paying attention, she said. I know, he replied. There was no edge to it. Just acknowledgement. Abby shifted slightly, aligning the next piece. I was wrong, she said. You've mentioned that. I'm refining it, she said dryly. This time he laughed. A quiet, genuine sound that caught her off guard. Go ahead, he said. Refine. She paused, considering her words. I thought awareness had to be visible to matter, she said slowly. That if someone cared, they'd demonstrate it in a way I understood. He leaned his hands lightly on the table, watching her. And I didn't, he said. You did, she countered. Just not in the language I was paying attention to. A small silence followed. That's a fair distinction, he said. She nodded, tightening the screw into place with steady precision. I didn't know there were other ways to read it, she added. You didn't need to, he said. Abby frowned slightly. That doesn't make sense. It does, he said gently. At the time, that's what made sense to you. She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped, because that was frustratingly true. I still should have seen more, she said. He shrugged lightly. Maybe, but that doesn't mean you were wrong to leave. The statement surprised her. You don't think I was? She asked. He met her gaze. I think you were looking for something specific, he said. And we weren't there yet. The word yet landed with quiet weight. Abby looked away. We might have gotten there, she said. He didn't answer immediately. Maybe, he said after a moment. Not dismissive. Not certain. Just honest. She let out a slow breath. That's not a satisfying answer. They usually aren't, he said. They worked again in silence for a while. But it had changed. Something in the conversation had settled. Not resolved, exactly, but acknowledged in a way that didn't require immediate conclusion. After a few minutes, Abby spoke again. You seem happy, she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. I am. There it was again. No hesitation. No qualification. Just truth. What does that feel like? She asked. The words slipped out before she could stop them. He glanced at her, surprised. You know what it feels like. Not like that, she said. He studied her for a moment. Like things don't need to be proven all the time, he said. Abby stilled. Like you don't have to keep checking if you're on the right track, he continued. You just keep going. She leaned back slightly, absorbing that. That sounds quiet, she said. It is, he agreed. She looked down at her hands, at the structure they had been building. at the way everything fit together piece by piece without force. I've spent a long time needing it to be loud, she said. I know. And I thought that meant it mattered more. He shook his head slightly. Sometimes it just means it's harder. Abby exhaled, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Everything with me is harder, she said. He didn't argue. That somehow was comforting. They finished the second structure just as the noise from the main room began to rise. Voices, movement, the event starting to come alive. Claire reappeared a moment later, scanning the room with quick efficiency. There they are, she said, spotting them. Right on time. She walked over, examining their work with open approval. These are perfect, she said. Seriously, thank you. Abby brushed her hands lightly against her jeans. It wasn't that complicated, she said. Claire smiled knowingly. No, but you made it easier. Abby didn't respond, because that felt significant in a way she hadn't expected. Claire straightened, looking between them. We're about to open, she said. You're both staying, right? Abby hesitated. Then, yes, she said. The answer surprised her less than it should have. Good, Claire said, because I may need more miracles. I don't do miracles, Abby replied. Claire grinned. You do structure. It's close enough. As Claire moved off again, Abby glanced at James. Well, she said, I suppose we've been promoted. Looks that way, he replied. She nodded once. Then, without overthinking it, she stepped forward, back into the main room, into the noise, into the unfolding evening. Not retreating, not observing from a distance, participating. And for the first time in longer than she cared to admit, Abby wasn't entirely focused on what came next. She was simply there. Watching her from a few steps behind, James felt that same quiet shift again. Not disruptive, not overwhelming, just present. Like something unfinished had found its way back into motion. Not to be rebuilt the same way, but to be understood differently this time. Chapter 8. What remains, what changes. The event ended later than Abby expected. Not because anything went wrong, quite the opposite. It unfolded with a kind of layered success she was not used to measuring. Not in numbers or outcomes or measurable returns, but in something quieter. People lingered. They didn't rush out once the formal parts ended. They stayed to talk, to laugh, to circle back around things that clearly mattered to them. That's inefficient, Abby murmured at one point. Claire, standing beside her, smiled knowingly. Or it's exactly the point. Abby didn't argue, because really watching it, she could see it. Nothing here was rushed. Nothing needed to be escalated to matter. Simply existed. And that, she was beginning to understand, was not the same thing as lacking value. By the time the last of the guests filtered out, the space had shifted again. Quieter now. Looser. The intensity of activity replaced by the steady wind down of shared effort. Abby stood near one of the tables they had built, her fingers resting lightly against the smooth edge, tracing the line where two pieces of wood met perfectly. Joint work, stable, functional. It held, she said softly. Yeah, James replied from behind her. She turned. He stepped closer, glancing at the structure. You did good work, he added. Abby huffed a quiet breath. I followed instructions. You adapted, he corrected. She tilted her head slightly, considering that. Is that what you call it? She asked. That's what it looked like, he said. A pause settled between them. Not strained, not uncertain, just open. Abby folded her arms loosely, leaning back against the table. I'm not used to adapting, she said. You are, he replied. Just usually on your terms. That's not the same, she said. No, he agreed. It's not. She nodded, then gestured lightly around the room. This isn't my usual environment. I noticed. And yet, she added, glancing at him, I didn't hate it. He smiled faintly. High praise. That's about as generous as I get, she said. I remember. The familiarity of that landed easily now, without the edge it might have carried before. They stood in silence for a moment, both looking out over the nearly empty space. Claire moved in the distance, finishing up final tasks, her energy still steady despite the long day. Abby followed her movement with her eyes. She's remarkable, she said. She is, he agreed. There was no hesitation in it. No need to qualify or soften the statement. Just truth. Abby nodded. I used to think relationships had to be intense to matter, she said. James glanced at her. And now, she exhaled slowly. Now I think maybe they just have to be consistent. He considered that. That helps, he said. She laughed softly. That's such an underwhelming endorsement. That's the point, he replied. She smiled. A real one. Not sharp or guarded. Just present. I misunderstood a lot, she said. He didn't answer immediately. Didn't rush to agree or dismiss. I think you saw what you knew how to see, he said. That's a generous interpretation. It's an accurate one, he said. Abby turned slightly, leaning more fully against the table now. I thought I needed something bigger, she said. More visible. more certain. And you got that, he said. Yes, she said. No hesitation. No denial. I did. Pause followed. And it mattered, she added. He nodded. I believe that. She studied him for a moment. You don't sound resentful, she said. I'm not, he replied. Not even a little? He thought about it. Not anymore, he said. The honesty of it landed clean. No drama. No lingering heat. Just time having done its work. Abby let out a quiet breath. That's fair. Another silence. But this one felt like closure, not forced, not imposed. Just arriving. You built something. Angie good, she said after a moment, nodding slightly toward where Claire stood. So did you, he replied. She shook her head slightly. Different kind. Still counts. She let that sit. Because she wasn't entirely sure she believed it in the same way. But she also wasn't as certain as she used to be that only one kind of success mattered. I'm glad you're happy, she said again. This time it held differently. Less like obligation. More like truth. Me too, he said. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just quiet certainty. She smiled faintly. I think I understand that now, she said. He didn't ask her to explain. He didn't need to, because the difference was visible. In the way she stood. In the way she spoke. Less driven by proof. More open to reflection. What about you? He asked after a moment. What happens next? The question didn't feel like pressure. Just curiosity. Abby considered it. I don't know, she admitted. Then added more thoughtfully. But I think I'm going to stop trying to make it obvious. He watched her, understanding without interrupting. I've spent a long time needing things to be clear, to validate themselves loudly, she continued. I think I might try letting them develop. He nodded once. That sounds different. It is, she said. For me. A soft quiet settled again. Not empty, just complete. Claire approached then, drawn by the slower pace of conversation and the sense that the evening was settling into its final moments. There you are, she said warmly. I was wondering where my best structural team disappeared to. Abby straightened slightly, smiling. We were evaluating long-term stability, she said. Of course you were, Claire replied, amused. Her gaze moved between them, perceptive as ever, but unobtrusive. Thank you, Abby, she added more sincerely. You made today better. Abby paused, then nodded. I'm glad I came, she said. It surprised her slightly. How true that felt. You're welcome back anytime, Claire said. There was no weight in the invitation. No expectation. Just openness. Abby glanced once at James, then back at Claire. I might take you up on that, she said. Claire smiled. Good. She moved off again, leaving them with just a few final moments. Abby reached for her bag, then considered him for a second longer. I'm glad we talked, she said. So am I, he replied. She nodded. No rush now. No urgency to prove or resolve anything further. Just acknowledgement. Take care, James, she said. You too, Abby. She turned and walked toward the door. This time she didn't hesitate, didn't look back. Not because she was closing something, but because she wasn't trying to return to it. Outside, the air felt cool again. Familiar. But she didn't feel smaller in it this time. She felt different. Not lighter. Not completely at ease. But clearer. And clarity, she realized, didn't always come from being right. Sometimes it came from understanding why you weren't. Abby walked to her car, her steps steady, her thoughts quieter. She didn't reach for her phone. Didn't seek distraction. She just stood for a moment, looking out at the city she had built her life in. The same city he had built his. Parallel paths. Diverging for a reason. Continuing still. Okay, she said softly. Not to anyone. Just to herself. Then she got in her car and drove. Forward. Inside, James watched through the window as Abby crossed the street and disappeared into the rhythm of the city. He didn't feel regret. He didn't feel loss. What he felt was simpler. Recognition. Of what had been. Of what hadn't worked. Of what had eventually become something else. Everything okay? Claire asked, stepping up beside him. He nodded. Yeah, he said. She followed his gaze for a moment, then looked back at him. Good, she said. And that was enough. Epilogue. 2 years later, 2 years, Abby discovered, was enough time for silence to become something else. Not emptiness. Not avoidance. Just space. The kind that let things settle into their actual shape. Saturday mornings had become her favorite. It wasn't intentional at first. It wasn't part of a plan or some carefully structured recalibration of her life. It had simply happened, quietly, the way most meaningful shifts did when she stopped trying to force them into place. She sat now at a small outdoor table, a cup of coffee cooling in front of her, a notebook open but mostly untouched. Elm and grain was still there. Of course it was. Somehow, it felt less like coincidence now and more like geography she had made peace with. She came here often. Not always at the same times. Not always with purpose. Sometimes to think. Sometimes not to. And occasionally, though less often now, to remember. Abby took a slow sip of her coffee, letting the morning settle around her. The city was already moving, but not urgently. There was a rhythm to it she hadn't noticed before, one that didn't demand she match its pace, that had taken time to understand. Time and a certain willingness to admit that not everything needed to be optimized. Her life had not fallen apart after that night 2 years ago. That had been the surprising part. She had half expected it to unravel, or at least shift dramatically in ways she couldn't predict. Instead, it had done something far more complicated. It had adjusted. She still worked the same job, still carried the same responsibilities, still succeeded in ways she had once defined as everything. But the edges had softened, not dulled, refined. She no longer chased certainty the way she once had. Didn't demand that every decision prove itself immediately. Didn't need every outcome to justify the effort behind it. Growth, she murmured. The word felt both accurate and slightly condescending. She smiled faintly. There were things she had re-examined. Not obsessively. Not to rewrite the past. Just honestly. Her marriage to James had not been a failure in the way she once framed it. That realization had come slowly, reluctantly, but firmly. It hadn't been wrong. It had just been incomplete. She hadn't known how to read what was there. Hadn't known how to recognize value that didn't present itself loudly. Hadn't understood that something steady could still be expanding. That part's on you, she said under her breath. And, for once, there was no sharpness in it. Just acknowledgement. She didn't regret everything. That surprised her too, because for a while it had been easy, almost comforting, to see it in absolutes, to decide she had been entirely wrong, or entirely right. Both were cleaner than the truth. Now she understood it better. She had wanted something specific, something visible, certain, undeniable, and she had gone after it. It hadn't been foolish, just limited. She hadn't known there were other ways to build a life that mattered. Now she did. Abby set her coffee down, glancing toward the door as it opened, more out of habit than expectation. And then she paused. James stepped inside. 2 years should have made the sight less familiar. It hadn't exactly, but it had changed the way it landed. Not sharp, not immediate, just recognition. He looked much the same, maybe a little more worn at the edges, the good kind, the kind that came from living a life fully rather than holding it at a distance. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he nodded. She nodded back. Simple. Easy. No hesitation. He walked toward the counter, exchanging a few words with the barista, the interaction smooth with familiarity. Abby watched briefly, then looked back down at her notebook. She didn't need to study him anymore. Didn't need to analyze the details, to extract meaning from every gesture. She already understood what mattered. A few minutes later, a chair shifted across from her. You always pick the same spot, James said. She looked up. Not always, she replied. Just when it's available. He smiled faintly, setting his cup down. That's fair. The ease of it wasn't surprising anymore. That had been one of the changes. There was no tension left between them that needed to be managed. No unresolved threads pulling at the edges of their conversations. What are you working on? He asked, nodding toward her notebook. Nothing, she said, closing it. Which is new for me. That sounds productive. It is, she said, in a different way. He sat back slightly, studying her. You seem good, he said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, she said. She considered it. Then added, more precisely, I am. He nodded once. I'm glad. And she believed him. That part had never been difficult. I ran into Claire last month, Abby said. His expression shifted, interested, but not surprised. At the center? He asked. Yes, Abby said. I stopped in. I've been helping out there sometimes. Of course you have, he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. She raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? It means you found a way to organize chaos and make it efficient. That's a public service, she replied. It is, he agreed. There was a pause, a comfortable one. She's good, Abby added. She is, he said. Another simple truth. Abby rested her hands lightly on the table. She told me something, she said. He waited. She said she wasn't worried when she first met me. He didn't look surprised. That sounds like her. I asked her why, Abby continued. And, he said. Abby smiled faintly. She said 2 things, she said. First, that I wasn't coming close to crossing any lines. He huffed a quiet breath. That's accurate. And second, Abby said, meeting his gaze directly, that she trusts you without question. That landed differently, quieter, deeper. James didn't respond immediately, but something in his expression settled. Intent but not defensive. That sounds like her too, he said. Abby nodded. I think that's when it finally clicked, she said. What did? He asked. That what you have isn't fragile, she replied. It doesn't need to be protected from people like me. People like you? He echoed. People from before, she said. He considered that. It was never about protection, he said. It was about being solid enough that it doesn't matter. Abby let out a slow breath. Yes, she said. That's what I mean. She leaned back slightly, the chair settling beneath her. I didn't understand that before, she added. You've said that, he replied. She gave him a look. I'm saying it better now. He smiled. You are. A moment passed. Then Abby's expression softened, something quieter settling into place. I'm really glad you built that, she said. Not just the life, the family, the steadiness of it. Everything she had once misread. He didn't deflect it, didn't minimize it, just accepted it. Me too, he said, and that was enough. No need for anything more. They sat there for a few minutes longer, finishing their coffee, conversation drifting easily from one topic to another. Nothing heavy, nothing unresolved. Just life. Eventually, Abby checked the time and stood. I should go, she said. Yeah, he replied, standing as well. They didn't hesitate, didn't linger unnecessarily. This wasn't something that needed to stretch itself thin for meaning. At the door, she paused. Take care, James, she said. You too, Abby. She stepped outside. The air felt familiar, but she didn't search it for answers anymore. Didn't expect it to give her anything beyond what was already there. She had what she needed. Not perfection, not certainty, but understanding and, finally, acceptance without regret. Abby walked down the street at an easy pace, the rhythm of the city matching her for once. Not rushing, not pulling ahead, just moving forward.